Let's talk to Rakib Hassan, who's here. We're going to talk to him about freedom of movement and, of course, these 20-mile-an-hour limits as well. Rakib, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, very well indeed. We're looking forward to this morning around about 9:30 getting the net migration figures out of the Home Office, which should, we imagine, show a few interesting little nuggets of news. Amongst them, I would be not surprised to find that there's probably been another 1 million or so people coming to this country in the past 12 months, because those are the kind of numbers we're looking at, right?
Well, I think we're living through an era of unprecedented migration into the UK. And I think that it's quite worrying for me that the new government is looking to reset relations with the European Union by offering this scheme where young EU migrants, aged between 18 to 30, I believe, it essentially would be offered a 3-year period to live, work and volunteer in the UK. I think that the emphasis needs to be on how to develop the skills, training opportunities and also bursaries and scholarships for young domestic people, young Britons. I think that that's where our focus needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely right. And look at what we're looking at now as well with Labour. They're repeatedly insisting that it has no plans to agree a youth mobility scheme, but it turns out that that's exactly what they're doing. Ministers have recognised that they would have to give ground on an issue, at least one issue, to the European Union in order to sort of try and improve relations with them. So EU citizens under the age of 30 would be allowed to live and work in the UK for up to 3 years with a reciprocal arrangement for UK citizens, and this would bring the EU in line with countries like Canada and Australia, which already have a similar deal with the UK.
Well, the difference is, Mike, with Canada and Australia, they are strategically important Commonwealth partners, right, who are part of the Anglosphere. That's not the case with the EU. It's totally different in that sense. And I think that more generally, in terms of looking at a youth mobility scheme, they're often sold as being reciprocal arrangements. Now, I'm not sure if you polled young people in Britain how eager they are to work, live and volunteer in the European Union. I think what they want greater economic opportunities, and they want a chance to get on the property ladder in their own country. Yeah. I think that would be their focus.
Yeah, well, also, most people in this country are not raised to speak another language, and so, you know, it's all very well saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if we had the opportunity to go and work in Spain or France or Germany or the Netherlands, but, you know, you've got to speak the language if you want to get a decent job, other than, I mean, you can't even work behind a bar if you haven't got the language skills. And the other fear that I've got about this is that, you remember what happens in Europe when anything like this kind of exchange is agreed, you end up getting people who are rather clever at sort of hoodwinking the authorities and who come in via Europe, but actually are not necessarily European and have come in from somewhere else. And you know, I know this happened with Romania before Romania was in the EU. A lot of people from Romania would go into Hungary and then come into Britain and say they were from Hungary.
Well, absolutely. And I think another point that I'd make is that there are former Union territories in India, such as the Daman and Diu former Union territories in Western India, where, because of the colonial links with Portugal, they can easily qualify for a Portuguese passport.
Yeah.
So this sort of scheme can be used as sort of pathway to enter the UK for people who are not EU migrants. They could be from totally different parts of the world, well outside of Europe.
Right.
So I think that these kind of youth mobility schemes, as you say, they are open well beyond. We're talking about the population of young people in the EU. But in fact, it's actually much wider than that.
Right. And there's an awful lot of unemployment, isn't there, in those countries as well? I mean, Nick in Wiltshire's just said that Spain leads both total and youth unemployment in the EU with rates of 12 and 28% of the population. And I remember that, I think in terms of the numbers of people who were unemployed in Spain, I think something like 25% of young people are unemployed in Spain.
Well, traditionally, the youth unemployment level has been quite high in Southern Europe. I mean, we have our own problems, Mike. The level of economic inactivity among young people is uncomfortably high in the UK. We should be focusing on that. But the worry is these kind of youth mobility schemes with the EU is ultimately going to be used as a way for other countries, especially in Southern Europe, to ultimately pass on young people that they can't find work for. and then they're ultimately being shifted to the UK, so they can essentially move disillusioned, frustrated young sections of their population to the UK, and that will bring its own problems as well for the UK.
Exactly right. And no doubt there will be people in the benefits system here who will be more than happy to hand over benefits to them if they come here and get a job and then lose it. And suddenly they can stay for 3 years and presumably claim some kind of benefit.
Right, I have absolutely no problem with attracting the brightest and the best in the world under a streamlined immigration system. But I think that having these sort of open-ended schemes, youth mobility schemes with the EU, I think that is fundamentally different. That is overly liberal, in my view. And I think that when it comes to how immigration works, we need to be attracting highly skilled, top-tier specialists. And if they are youthful and energetic and they happen to be from Europe, feel free. We'll welcome them with open arms to the UK. But youth mobility schemes like this, they're far too open. And in my view, we need to work towards a more streamlined immigration system with a strong emphasis towards attracting highly skilled migrants.
And also in the week when we learned that the EU wants us to pay somewhere between €6 and €7 to go to Europe on a visa, similar to an ESTA that you get to go to the United States. It doesn't look as if they're being particularly friendly, does it? I mean, they don't have to charge people to go there. They've obviously just decided to do it out of spite.
No, absolutely. And I think this is the point. Sometimes what the UK needs to do, it needs to provide a firm hand here. When it comes to these kind of negotiations. And it's the same, for example, with the UK and India having these conversations over a new free trade agreement. That shouldn't be at the expense of hyper-liberalising our already very liberal immigration system when it comes to Indian nationals.
Yeah.
So I think that what the UK government has to do has to make sure that it strikes positive trade agreements, for example, whether it's with the EU, countries outside the EU, such as India, but it can't be to the point that fundamentally sacrifices the regimented nature, which, to be honest, we don't have a regimented immigration system, but making it even more liberal is something I don't actually think many British people would be very supportive of.
No, and given the track record of the Home Office, I wouldn't trust them either to give people the right to come here for 3 years and then even bother to check whether they leave or not, because a lot of people come here who are supposed to stay for 2 years after they finish their college degree, and then they just don't leave.
Well, absolutely. Overstaying your visa is a problem in itself.
Yeah.
We simply don't tackle that problem the way we should. And I think ultimately the core essence of a democratic nation state is that you keep on top of those things. If it is a 3-year visa, if it's not renewed or extended, that person must return to their country of origin. It's as simple as that. So overall, I'm not very supportive of the scheme at all.
No, right. Just before we let you go, I'd like you to get your thoughts on the 20-mile-an-hour business. You know, we've seen damage it does to places like London. I don't know what it's like in Luton where you are, but, I mean, 20-mile-an-hour zones popping up all over the place. Labour now want to make them even more likely. They want to give local councils the right to put them in pretty much willy-nilly whenever they want to. Which is going to be bad news for the economy, bad news for drivers, bad news all round for probably air pollution as well.
Well, that's the point. It's not necessarily good news for the environment, if truth be told. I think more generally, I'm absolutely fine with reduced maximum speeds, especially in areas where there's schools. In those areas where you have young children walking, I have absolutely no issue with that. I think we should encourage that.
Yeah.
But I think the scale to which that this is being spread across the UK, I feel it's very counterproductive. And I think especially if it comes to the efficient transfer of transportation of goods, it will slow down the economy in some ways. So I think that it's something that, again, in certain places, if it's well targeted, it works well. It has its purpose, but I think the extent to the scale of it, I think, is an issue.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Rakib, thanks very much indeed. Good to talk to you. Rakib Hassan, political commentator.